Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
The show is a proud media partner for the 11th Annual Media Excellence Awards, which are produced by Access Entertainment in Los Angeles, California. The Media Excellence Awards are recognized as the most influential awards show honoring innovation and leadership in all things mobile entertainment, lifestyle, and technology. For more information on how to submit to these awards, please visit MediaXAwards.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Carie Davis. She's a partner at Your Ideas Are Terrible. Carie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. You have a really interesting background, and what you're doing now is really interesting and innovative. But maybe before we get into all that stuff, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Okay. I am from a city in Georgia called Marietta. It's a suburb of Atlanta. I live in Atlanta now, but that's where I grew up. I went to Georgia Tech.
Okay, what did you take and why?
I studied industrial design there.
Interesting.
Why I think is a harder question, because at the time, I don't know what it's like these days to be a high school senior, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And Georgia Tech was close and it was cheap and sounded good. So I was like, maybe I'll be an engineer. I don't really know what that means, but somehow found the College of Architecture when I was like a quarter after I started, and found the industrial design as a major, which a lot of people, I think now, still don't even know what that is. It's product design. It's the people who are putting form around the gadgets and the various things like that in your life that you touch and feel. I think maybe Apple has shined a light on it, but
that's interesting. you know what's funny about this, and like I was thinking about it, like when we talked like a while ago about just kind of in a pre-interview before the show, is that's one thing that I wish I would have taken in school. Like the whole like industrial kind of package design space has always really, really fascinated me, and I had the opportunity and I didn't take it, and kind of a long story, but so for me it's always been this kind of like really cool kind of space. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. I think you should go back and study it if you want, man. You should definitely do that.
Maybe one day. maybe in the evenings or something.
I'll coach you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll send you it and you'll be like, no, that's terrible. Go back. Get it? Your ideas are terrible?
I do.
Okay, no, that's cool. So walk me through, you get out of school, walk me through your kind of career journey up until kind of what you're doing now, and some career highlights along the way, because you've done some really innovative stuff and you're still doing that.
So when I got out of school, I took a job doing packaging design, so structural packaging at a supplier. Basically, they're a supplier of big companies like Coca-Cola, for example. So they'll do paper carton and plastics and that kind of thing. And I did that for a few years. But then Coca-Cola called and they were like, we've got an open. I knew some people who worked there. I mean, small town, really, Atlanta. And it was useful because it was within the R&D group, which was doing a lot of focusing on packaging, the work that I would have been doing, and equipment. So I moved over to Coca-Cola. And for a few years, in fact, I worked on various structural packaging and equipment projects, got a few design patents under my belt, which is not super impressive, but it's a patent nonetheless.
It's totally
so
cool.
Take it.
It's totally cool.
Utility patents are really, the jam, but anyway.
It still counts.
So, and it's funny because I worked on a lot of bottles, really, and I would always, every now and then, you'll see the package on the shelf, and that's cool and exciting, like Powerade bottle or.
Oh, you did the Powerade? Did you actually do the Powerade bottle?
Yes.
That's very cool.
I know, it's funny, but then you see it like as litter on the street, and it's not as fun. It's like,
No,
oh,
interesting.
Gosh, that's a bummer.
So
it's just there's so many of them, it's a weird thing.
Yeah. So how many iterations of that did you do before you guys kind of came to the final design that, we use every day?
Oh.
Do you remember?
Well, I don't remember. It's kind of the process of like, let's do a bunch of sketches. So there were probably 50 thumbnail sketches, but then to kind of narrow it down, I would say there was probably like 10. And then I think they did some, I can't remember, but typically it would be like, let's make some and put them in front of people and see what they think, which would always drive me a little bit crazy, because I think the best solutions that we ever had were the ones where we either didn't have time to like, get a bunch of people to just chime in on something they know about it because they interact with it, but they can't really tell you, well, I prefer this one over this one because, they can make a guess. And at that point, they're actually making stuff up. Like, well, this one's easier to hold. None of these bottles are hard to hold. You know what I mean? So
yeah, interesting. Sure. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I like the grip on this one. So anyway, but like the aluminum bottle, we worked with an agency at first, and the scope, the challenge that we always had was defining the scope tightly enough and the constraints, because when you're manufacturing something that's, going to be millions and millions, you can't really do a whole lot with an infrastructure that already exists. So a lot of times it would be interesting because engineering wouldn't reveal all of the things that you actually needed to take into account. And marketing, I was sort of always sitting between marketing and engineering. And it was, I learned quickly, you have to ask those questions. You have to prod, and you have to say, you need to tell me the envelope that we're working in, otherwise it's going to be a waste of money. So it started early. I think my desire to help people not waste time and effort and energy and money and all of those things on ideas that are flawed from the start because you haven't done the upfront work to investigate, is there something what are we actually trying to solve here, let alone, you can't even manufacture that. It won't work. So that's the type of thing that I got into early on. And then I could keep going down the path, I guess, of... Yeah, sure. So I get eventually a group was officially created at Coke called Global Design, which didn't really exist when I started. It was kind of weird to think. Okay. So it allowed us to have a little bit more leeway as far as creating strategy for design initiatives and things that we were getting involved in. And so that was always compelling to me. Like here's why we're actually going to make things look the way they look, because it's very easy for people to react to design in a way that's subjective. So my goal was always to help give people tools to evaluate design in a way that would be more objective and that we could debate in a rational way. And that's difficult. On some level, it is going to be it's a little bit of a gut instinct in there, but sure. that was always my goal. So I started to do that in the projects I was working on, and then I eventually got into training people in design thinking, which was, at the time I think was still, and actually it's still being used. I was a little surprised. I thought it might be one of those things that, it's trendy for a while and the next thing comes along, but design thinking it's gotten its hooks in people. So that's pretty.
We can blame Apple for that in a good way.
Yeah, that's true. These are all good things.
Yeah, no.
So I created an initiative or a program really that we went around and started to run workshops really that had a cross-functional group of people, kind of walking them through a design thinking curriculum and some exercises, which was meant then to help them remove the waste from the work that they were doing, designing for systems as opposed to one-offs and things that just look really good on a white piece of paper. Sure. How are they actually going to look in market, and how can we make sure we can actually manufacture them at scale? And that led me to, I was at Coke for 12 years, so This wasn't like a quick transition. I spent some time in Indonesia too, which was really fun. Coke is, the best thing about working with Coke, I would say, is that it's a global company. They're in nearly every country. and it just, you're able to take advantage of that if you're in a lot of ways. So I took an assignment in Indonesia where we actually were trying to launch. We did a prototype of the design thinking initiative, which, it's like going into that, we had a lot of big plans and we're going to do this and that, but you realize, like, the challenges that you face in a market are just so much different from when you're sitting in global headquarters. And I really wish that there was more of an opportunity for everybody to visit the markets, because you just recognize I'm creating stuff that's it's gonna make it hard for them to implement. Or I'm not even considering the fact that they can't even do the very basic stuff because of the way the market works, and because of the way their system is their relationship with the bottlers or something. So that was a big eye opener, and it just sort of helped me, I think, hopefully be more of a well-rounded contributor to the business.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, you never know about kind of the different perspectives, right? Like, you try to take your best guess sometimes, but until you're actually there and kind of on the ground talking to people, there's things that you would never even think of that happen, right? Or can't happen. And I think, like, genuinely most kind of designers don't want to kind of like they want to try to include as many people as possible, but there's sometimes you can't know about it until you're actually there physically kind of experiencing it yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's easier to ignore that stuff if you're
True.
not interested in getting real things in the market, but you really want a cool portfolio.
Yeah, interesting.
Way easier.
Yeah, that's the thing that I've always struggled with as kind of a designer myself. It's like especially kind of like software, for example. I spend a lot of time in the kind of the enterprise software space, and it's like a lot of the times it's not pretty. It needs to be functional, right? I'm not saying it needs to be ugly, but it's not an art piece, right? Like,
yeah.
it can't be complicated. Like, sure, if I made it complicated, it's a cool portfolio piece, but if nobody uses it, I failed, completely failed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Who cares what it looks like?
Yeah,
and I was, go
keep
ahead.
going. No, you go.
I remember at one point there was a group. I mean, even the design firms that I work with, they were some of the greatest design people in the world, because that's who Coke wanted to work with, and
Sure.
I loved it. It was inspiring for me, but there would be moments where you'd have these debates like, well, I mean, we really just think you should get rid of this entire kind of component without getting too technical. Like these little feet that are on the bottom of a Coke bottle, they're there for pressure. Like that's a product that's under pressure.
Okay.
And it's like you can't just leave those off. If you suggest leaving those off, you're changing the entire manufacturing system at Coca-Cola, right?
Sure.
But it was like, I think we're not fighting hard enough for this. It's like I agree.
No, that's interesting, because you're right? Like if I was making 30 products, okay, maybe I could do it, right? Like 30 but when you guys are making millions of bottles, like it's a huge issue.
Yeah, you're not going to, just to make it look a little better,
Yeah.
not going to change that overnight. So anyway, that was always kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
And a good challenge. I mean, I believe constraints are the greatest gift. I'm not the only person who feels that way, but
Sure. Agreed.
I mean, there's something very rewarding about being able to take all the constraints in and feel like you've uncovered everything you possibly could in order to create something that actually is functional and is going to look good, because there is certainly beauty and utility.
Totally. No, I think that's great. So you leave Coca-Cola. Walk me through kind of how you started. Kind of your ideas are terrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, before I left, the last role that I had there was a new group that was created because the CEO was getting kind of nervous. I mean, it's still something that people talk about, but at the time, Kodak had just filed for bankruptcy, and disruption was what everybody was talking about. Even though Clayton Christensen's book had come out a lot earlier, it was suddenly like, it's now becoming real. I'm kind of worried about this. Do we have a team that we can kind of put on that? And that's a very similar story. Actually, a lot of people who end up taking jobs in this sort of disruptive innovation space, it's just like, we need to go figure that out. Who's going to do that? So
Sure.
you're just sort of sitting there with this giant challenge and you don't really know what to do. So for 3 years, we had a team of, there were about 3 of us. It kind of varied, but we were trying to figure out, what does that look like for Coca-Cola? How do you navigate when you're trying to work on ideas that are way outside of the core business model, which is what the objective was.
Sure.
People tend to not understand that and get frustrated with you and kind of throw knives at you, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
totally.
It was like always an interesting place to sit. And, we worked on a few different things. It was one initiative that was basically trying to build startups inside of the company. And we hired people all around the world in different cities to build startup ideas. So the idea was, Coke has all these incredible assets. Can't we put some people on that have the experience creating their own startups, and then build, create something that could be very valuable to the company or become the next thing that Coke is? And in hindsight, it's very easy for me to say I would never ever recommend that path, because it's very expensive to start your own startup when the ideas that eventually came out of it were companies that already existed in the world, in fact. So it's like, how can you say Coca-Cola should create a platform for kind of the gig economy when there's a bunch of them that are already out there,
right,
that are doing okay? I mean, they did it anyway, and it's fine. And these companies, there are a few of these ideas that still exist out there. But I also think, there's, for anybody doing this now, I would say, consider actually just partnering before you go and try to create everything on your own, because it's going to take longer. It's going to be more expensive. Just go out, and right now you can pilot with with a startup that's actually already doing what could be a good idea,
Sure.
So we did that.
Sorry, just before, or what about your thoughts on actually just putting money into some of those companies that you think you could potentially either acquire eventually or just be a long-term kind of partner with, right? Like Coke obviously has probably some money that they could put into some startups that they think could be beneficial to their business. I'm guessing here, but it sounds probably true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have to have a portfolio approach actually to that whole idea. So, Coke makes beverages as their core business. So they have initiatives around, how do they, I don't work there anymore, how do they, start to sense what are the emerging beverage product categories that are growing quickly. So they have ways that they do look at those types of things and make investments. There's a lot of examples like Zico and Honest Tea and that kind of thing. So they have mechanisms for that. And I think that's very important. That's one thing. The other thing that we now, we can get to what I'm doing now, tend to look at is how do you actually help core business initiatives, like, the back of house stuff that's not always sexy, or how are you evolving how you market to your consumers? How do you use technology in new ways to connect with customers and consumers? Those, I think, are ways that you could potentially invest in startups, but I actually think having a revenue relationship with a startup, so just being a customer of a startup is a pretty like easy. It's not very expensive.
Sure.
It's a way to try some things out and actually get your employees involved in, understanding new technology and how they can engage with startups and new business models to do what they're already trying to do in a new way. So instead of hiring a big agency to come up with some ideas and build new solutions perhaps, or even trying to build things internally, which I know is still something that a lot of big organizations try to do. Like, we've got ideas, we've got people with skills and talent, let's build these things internally. I think it's still cheaper, and perhaps you'll get more interesting ideas because you're inside of these organizations and you can't possibly see everything that's happening in the world. Sometimes it's useful to have that outside perspective at who's created something that could be useful for you. So those are models that I think are really interesting. And as far as investment in technology startups, I guess the thing I think is maybe the easiest path is when, it's an R&D group and they're already partnering with universities and things, looking at new technology that's longer term.
Interesting.
I think that's probably what I would say is like a very kind of straightforward approach to the different areas that you would need to look at as a big company. And certainly that's not everything that people do, but just at a very basic level. I think investing, there's a lot of venture funds that big companies do have now. And I think the people that I've talked to that run those, a lot of what they're doing is just keeping their eye on things that are interesting. I don't think they ever expect to make a lot of money on them. So like if they're investing in a logistics company that, a startup, it's not necessarily that they're expecting to make billions of dollars off that company. That's super cool if that happens, but it's more about kind of like how you characterized it. We want to be the ones that own that technology. If it becomes something super useful, we want to be able to get a cheaper price instead of buying something for billions of dollars later. Can we invest early? So I think there are a lot of strategies that can help you do that.
Interesting. Okay, so walk me through kind of your transition into Your Ideas Are Terrible.
Yeah. So the last thing that I did at Coke was I sort of shifted my focus from those disruptive ideas, because those things were kind of running and good or bad, because the chief technical officer, I think was his title at the time, was like, you guys you learned a lot about how startups operate, and I think that's cool. Why don't we try to give some of those skills, lean startup methodologies being kind of the main thing, to the people working on the core business? Like, I think that might be interesting. It could be a culture initiative. So I started to do that, which I found to be really, really fun, but also it was eye-opening. You start to uncover there's still challenges with that. You give these people new skills and they're ready to run, but the business is still ready to kind of hold them back.
Interesting.
But anyway, yeah, that's what I started to do. Probably the last year that I was there, I went into a startup accelerator to even kind of figure out a way to build an accelerator inside of Coke.
Interesting.
But the challenge was the group I was working in, and I think I actually was at a conference, and I wish I could remember her name. A woman presented about those types of roles, so people who have jobs in the disruptive innovation space, or they're in an innovation role. The jobs don't last very long because the appetite that the company has. Like, you have a few back orders, they're pulling things back to the core business because they have to. It's very difficult to justify, well, we're working on, startup ideas. Well, we're trying to just, run the business over here, and, we had a bad quarter, so we want to take that money and put it somewhere else.
Interesting.
So my role, and it's significant. Like, there's no growth path either for these people. That's what this woman's research had sort of recognized. And I even knew too, taking that role when I took it, I recognized this is probably going to be the last job I have at Coke, because I don't see any other. There isn't another path forward. There's no, like a brand manager has a very clear career path as an engineer. Those are very old and established jobs at these companies. But disruptive innovation, it's just still, it was always characterized as an experiment. So
interesting.
It was a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess and just thinking about this as we're talking, like you could say you build an accelerator or you guys incubate a startup and it makes $1 billion. You're expected to do that again and again and again, and probably you're expected to keep top the last one, right? And hitting one time making a company that's worth $1 billion is almost impossible, right? It's attainable, but the chances of it happening to anyone, no matter how much money you throw at something, is almost unattainable, right?
Yes.
And
exactly.
never mind doing that kind of year after year or quarter after quarter, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah, like you will fail eventually just because like you can't be that lucky.
Yeah. I mean, and the expectations of, what we got to get stuff out into the market. Yeah. When are we going to get our big ideas?
Yeah.
Are, it's like, well, you probably have to launch 100 or 1,000 before you get to something that's actually going to sink in. But, and no big company, I would say, has the patience for that. I mean, there are plenty of organizations that are still, they're working their way through this, and there's some success, I would say. But
sure.
For me, it was good to experience that, because I left, and I was still very excited about the idea of going into organizations and doing boot camps and coaching them on lean startup methodologies.
Sure.
And that was the formulation. I mean, it was kind of just a continuation of what we were doing at Coke. I had hired someone to help me as a consultant at the time, and then he and I just became partners, which was useful because we really loved it. Like, we created curriculum, and people would come to these sessions, and we would do it was more like 100 people, right? And it's a big event, and we modeled it after Startup Weekend, which you may be familiar with. I'm not sure.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like you go and you learn how to start a business and build a business in 3 days. You work with people across the company you never have. You learn, how to ask the right questions, and you ask yourself questions, because the cognitive errors that you're facing, cognitive bias that exists, is what's going to kill your ideas. So that's actually why we named our company Your Ideas Are Terrible.
Interesting.
Because having that humility when you come up with, just this first germ of an idea, to be able to go out and face the things that could kill your idea fastest, that's the most useful. It's like, if you ignore all the things that are going to get in the way of that idea being successful, you're just going to waste a lot of time. So that's what we try to set that up in the beginning as, that's the whole objective of what we're doing here. You're going to go face your fears, basically. And people found that very compelling and kind of liberating, because you aren't really allowed to do that in your day job. I mean, you're really sitting around trying to justify why this project still exists, and we were told we had to launch this, so you got to launch it.
Yeah.
So I think it was, people, good and bad. Like, people would cry. I mean, we still have clients that get so emotional, and it's this feeling of, gosh, one guy actually said, this is the company I've been waiting for, which was, it's amazing. It's like,
totally.
That's how you want the company to act, but it's, they would go back to their day jobs and kind of get crushed because their manager doesn't understand what they're talking about, or they're not ready to hear, why are we doing this? This is actually, there's no valid reason for the consumer doesn't want this. And it's like, you're going to hit a wall. And so in fact, a lot of the companies that are doing that kind of work are getting into change management because of that very fact. Like, you train people and give them all these new skills, but the business itself isn't operating that way. You got to go a lot deeper and wider across, a lot of different things that are happening. But that's what we did. And we still do that, but we've transitioned into more in the tech collaboration space, which we can also talk about. I can pause there if there's any.
Yeah, no, that's actually quite fascinating, because I think I think most people kind of either in the design space or in the tech space one day would love to be like, run an innovation hub inside of a big company, because they're like, they have all the time and the resources and money to let me just kind of figure it out. But it's quite fascinating that you were basically in that experience, and you obviously had some successes with it, but there was also some kind of like downsides of it, which is interesting to me that I never really would have thought of, right? Especially the one that, like, it's not really core to their business and the growth opportunities aren't really there, right? So it's quite fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Building the Future. This show is heard by more than 1 million people monthly in over 15 markets worldwide, including Silicon Valley. Kevin Horick's guests are leading business owners, successful entrepreneurs, and merchandisers worldwide. Now, your brand has an opportunity to tap into this dedicated and active group of business people who are looking for places to invest and the right opportunities to support. Find out how you can get involved at buildingthefutureshow.com.
walk me through then kind of you transition to what are you guys kind of doing now, and what's your kind of ideal client at Your Ideals Are Terrible?
Yeah, so a really interesting thing happened, in fact, right as we had started Your Ideas Are Terrible, and we're doing just the kind of the standard lean startup methodology work,
Right.
was that there was a gentleman at Coca-Cola who had created this program called The Bridge.
Okay.
And it's interesting because, we were working on building startup ideas, and similarly around the same time, he was building this thing in Tel Aviv that was more along the lines of how do we partner with startups as opposed to build them on our own. And yeah, it was funny because, it was like we were watching each other and we would interact, but it was obvious that there were very different philosophies that were the basis of each of those ideas. So he was leading an IT innovation group, and that was, it made a little more sense perhaps for them to engage with the startup community in the way that they had. I mean, they went to Tel Aviv and actually asked the community, like, we want to work with startups. What should we do? And
that's cool.
Luckily, I thought it was pretty, I wasn't in those conversations, but it sounds like most people said, we don't need another accelerator. We don't need you to come here and fund an incubator or help new startups get started. We actually need inroads into your company because we want to grow faster, right? We want customers.
Makes sense.
And I was like, genius. You don't need all, it's also a better model, I think. We can get into a whole debate about venture capital, but, having customers giving you money is actually the most sustainable approach to building your business.
100% agree. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Anyway, right. Hello out there. So that's what the program they created was founded on. So, they had a program where they would have about 10 startups, and the whole idea was over the course of, I think it's like 6 months, they would make connections and they would help them get pilots and help work with their, the business at Coca-Cola to learn how to better work with startups, because that's the challenge. It's actually on both sides, right?
Sure.
So they decided to launch that in Atlanta around the same time we started our business. So it took about a year to get off the ground in Atlanta. But I think the cool thing that they wanted to do here was, the climate here is different. We aren't Tel Aviv, certainly. We're not Startup Nation. We're not Silicon Valley. There are not a billion startups floating around.
Right.
It's an emerging ecosystem. So
Sure.
They, the Anthony at Coke was like, I think it would be cool if we actually created a community around this with other corporations, and that we started to build, build this as a capability for the city.
Sure.
And we got six corporations also involved in the program.
Very cool.
And it's kind of like you share the costs, you share the lessons. All the corporations are non-competitive, so they're constantly like, I'm having an issue with my legal team. Can we talk? Or, hey, I'm looking at a deal with this startup. What are you guys looking at? Maybe we can do something together. And it's kind of one of those things too. What we've recognized even over the years, and I recognize that the corporate innovator is it's a lonely game, and so the more that you can connect and learn from each other in this space, the better. The Bridge community is now what it's called in Atlanta, became a client, and just the model of trying to help corporations and startups find each other at a very minimum, and then find ways to work together, the mechanisms involved in that, the types of trainings that we provide on each side. Those are what we are most compelled by and what's driving our business forward, because there's a lot of pull for that right now. And we also, I think it's, to me, and again, I could probably can tell from just what I've been saying, I think that it's a really efficient way to get to drive your business forward. I think it helps you have more of a heads-up approach. You're out looking at what's happening in the world so that you can collaborate, and collaboration is so critical. If you continue to make it difficult to engage externally, I think you're only going to get more and more behind. And it's actually really healthy for your employees. I mean, people get excited when they know that it's okay to work with a startup. You kind of have to give them permission, because you have to also give them the tools. A lot of people will definitely, you're definitely not going to get everybody excited about it.
Sure.
A lot of people could feel is a threat. But, the people that you want to keep around are the ones that are going to be excited about it. Yeah, that's what we look at. That's what we're really focused on these days.
Interesting. That's actually like quite fascinating of a role. Like, it's got to feel pretty rewarding when you actually like put these connections together and then they actually build or do something pretty cool together.
Yeah, it is. And I think the thing that's funny when we are recruiting for the program, we'll talk to startups and we explain, basically we don't give the startups any money, but we also don't take any equity.
Sure.
And the things that we give them are, we give them a 2-day enterprise sales training workshop. We give them a full day storytelling workshop with a woman who actually used to train all the brand managers at Coca-Cola for, storytelling. And I think that's cool. The things we've recognized, that make it difficult for a startup and a corporation to talk to each other. Number one is language. So we give them things like that, or that we found to just, in general, be very useful and valuable that a startup without being in the program would have to pay for themselves. And it's kind of a hefty price tag for an individual startup, right?
Sure.
You probably wouldn't invest in that. And so then it's also, we run, we call them Connect Days. So each corporation will have a subset usually of the startups in, and they basically spend the whole day getting them in front of all kinds of people at their organization. So at a very minimum, even if nothing else happens, so let's say a pilot doesn't get done and nothing moves forward, that itself is pretty valuable to be able to have those conversations, to get in front of so many of your customers in a very short amount of time. It's actually a way that a couple of startups have been in the program. I've said, you know what, we recognize that we're wrong about our customer and we're changing, or we decided to focus. Like, we recognize that our pitch was just way too broad. So they didn't get any pilots, but they actually created a business model. We're then able to create a business model that would stick. And so there's always a little bit of suspicion when the startups are talking to us. It's like, it sounds too good to be true. Like, what's the hitch? And, they always expect.
Yeah, I guess. Hey, like, kind of big companies kind of sometimes have that, a bit of a bad stigma around that, right? Like, what are they getting out of this that I'm not told? Yeah, fair. Interesting.
Right. So, it's like, I don't have anything to tell you. There's not really, for me, there's, the only downside I'd say is, well, it takes a little bit of your time, but I think there's definitely positive. So, we also don't make anybody move here or sit in a space with us. So it's a very light touch. We really try to make it as easy as possible, because the goal really is, let's get you in front of as many customers as possible with the right tools, because the corporations want that too. Their interest is, I need to drive innovation across a bunch of different areas of my business. So let's make it happen.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting, because it's even easier. Like, if you guys connect them, like a startup at Inside Coke or another big brand, and they do a pilot program and it costs one of those big brands, tens of thousands of dollars to try something out for 3 to 6 months and then decide if it's working or not. Like, that's such a drop in the bucket, right? Like, it's almost insignificant. But if they hire a team of, 5, 10, 15 plus people to work on something for 3 to 6 months, it's obviously like an astronomical cost, right? Plus office space and computers and whatever, like, it gets crazy, right? So I can see how it's very beneficial for the companies to even offer all this stuff kind of free, because even if they have to pay for some of these kind of pilots for a few months, it's so inexpensive that could really save them a lot of money in the long run. Is that kind of how you guys do it?
Yeah, definitely. So the cost of a pilot, we coach the startups to, try to come in around 20, 25,000, 30, as much as 50,000.
Sure.
And it all depends. There's things like, what's your signing level, the person that you're working with, what can they actually approve. But yeah, those amounts of money are ideally, that's money that group already had to achieve this objective anyway. And again, since it's core business related, we do a lot of upfront work with the corporations, and each of the corporations has, people that we engage with who are going and talking to various groups across companies. They're talking to strategy. They're talking
Right.
to, business functional leaders and saying, what are the things that you would do if you actually had more time or more people? What are the business challenges that you're trying to solve that you haven't solved yet? So that's what actually informs where we recruit and the spaces that we look in. And we do a lot of work within the interview process, even to make sure that we're bringing in startups that they actually have a home for, or at least think they have, they're at least 80% there. And it's, nothing's ever a definite.
Sure.
Things happen. But, it's like it's not just one person saying, oh, I think these are really cool ideas. Let's try to bring them into the company. And then they end up hitting a wall because, and this we've learned from experience actually, because if you don't spend enough time interacting across the business, you'll run into things like, well, yeah, we really like this idea, but we're actually already working with somebody in that space, or we just invested in another company that does that, or, we tried it and it didn't work, which isn't a good enough answer in my opinion, but you'll get that too. So we're trying to, minimize that. And I think on our third year now, I think we've gotten better at avoiding some of those kind of awkward, oh, okay, sorry.
No, but that's good though, right? Because I think at the end of the day, you're basically trying to set up kind of both sides for the most amount of success possible. It's not always the case. It won't always happen, but I think the bigger thing though too is like if you didn't do what you did and you and I just were both kind of like fresh out of school, we're going to build a startup together, and we wanted to get Coke as our first client because we think we could build something that's really valuable, or we've already kind of built something. Actually getting in front of somebody at Coke could take an astronomical amount of time, right? Or a big corporation like that, right? And then if you get in front of one person and they either don't understand or don't really know or can't really help you, but their boss could, but like they won't put, like there's so many hurdles, right, that you guys just get rid of by just kind of doing a program like this, at least from my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's what it's meant to do, really. It's meant to make that process of getting in front of the right person who has the autonomy and the permission to work with you.
Yeah, permission is huge, right?
Yeah. And I think another thing that is useful, you could certainly be a corporation, and a lot of companies do this. They'll bring in startups and kind of present them and say, here's some startups you can work with. But having a program where we have a set of startups that have been vetted and have been trained to actually work with you and hopefully build a more productive relationship, it's helpful. I mean, it's helpful to come in under an umbrella of something that there's a strategy around and there's a clear objective for why you would get involved in it.
Yeah, that's actually quite fascinating. So is there any types of startups that you guys kind of look at? I know you deal with a bunch of companies, Coke included, but that are in certain verticals that you guys prefer, or is it kind of open-ended?
It depends on what the corporations are looking for. I mean, it's generally marketing automation is always something that's useful. Logistics and supply chain is always useful. I'm trying to think of related to companies we have. Hiring is one that typically comes up. Hiring tech talent. The last 2 years we've had startups who are helping in that space. Yeah. And I'm just trying to think what else. Yeah. Anything that's related to, building out their or like online platforms and things like that. So how do you automate things like customer feedback and customer support? We see a lot of desire in that space as well.
Interesting. The tech talent space is interesting. They have a huge trouble hiring tech talent because I'm assuming that a lot of them want to actually work at the startup, not at the big company. Is that the problem?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the company we have right now is called Filtered, and they help qualify tech talent. So I was unaware, but there's a lot of a lot of fraud that takes place if you're in that space. So they have a system for that, and it's more just like, I mean, we do see a lot of corporations are certainly trying to hire technical talent, and it really is it's a battle. I mean, I think that's a big reason why a lot of them are setting up spaces around places like Georgia Tech. That's why they are talking about innovation programs, and these are the things we're trying to set up because it helps a person who is looking for a job see them as innovative. I mean, it's clearly like there's a big PR play around that because it is, it's a struggle.
So no, I 100% agree. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you've worked in this space for a while now. What advice do you kind of give to startups that are kind of maybe looking to break into some of these, big kind of corporations and actually maybe get a pilot program, whether they go through your guys' bridge community or not?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thing that has always been pretty obvious to me, and having had an innovation title at a big company,
Mm-hmm.
It's useful to recognize that that's usually not your customer. So innovation people at corporations, again, it's a weird job. I mean, it's usually not the person who is dealing with a P&L or a core business function in any way. They're sort of they're trying to connect dots, or they're creating capability programs. And if you are searching for just that person and trying to get them to help you find the right person for your business, then it's going to take you a lot longer, especially if they're not a person who's empowered to engage with startups. You just never know. So I think the thing that's the most useful for a startup, if you are a B2B startup, and I would hope that you're already doing this, but how do you get in front of how do you figure out the title of the person who actually would buy what it is that you're selling?
Interesting.
Is it a sports marketing person? I mean, I think that, there's all sorts of weird specific titles that people have inside corporations, and you
Sure.
have to do a lot of research to figure out who that is. I mean, I think ideally you're a person who's come from, or you have some domain expertise. Maybe you've worked at a corporation and you understand the space already. Otherwise, I think it would be a challenge to get into a B2B type situation where you're kind of unaware of what the marketplace even looks like. Doesn't mean you can't learn, but it means you have to do a lot of work to have as many conversations as possible with that person with that job title across a lot of businesses. And that's, I think, something we see people, I don't know if it's just confounding, I think, sometimes if you're not aware of how these big companies are organized.
Sure.
And you don't have some insight or somebody to talk to about it, especially if you've never worked at one. So I think that would be my number one advice. It's like even when we have people apply to the Bridge Community Program,
yeah.
One of the questions we ask is, these are the companies that are in the program. Can you think of, an example or what a pilot might look like for one of them even? So your job is to understand what that company does and why they would be interested in your technology and what your business does. But people are not very good at that. They're much too involved in, this is what I offer, and I could definitely help Coke's marketing group. I just know it.
I see.
It's not specific. It's just not specific enough,
Yeah.
not compelling, and it doesn't get the interest like someone who goes and very specifically says, I work with the IT procurement group. I help them source tech talent this way. They're already struggling with it like this, and that's the ideal. And not everybody's there, but that's how you get attention.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think part of it too is people are busy, right? So if you don't kind of give them like a pretty good idea of how you can help, and it kind of piques their interest, it's not that they're trying to be mean in your example with like, I know I can help marketing. It's like, you know what, you probably can, but like, unless you can give me kind of a tangible thing I could actually take to somebody in marketing to say like, you know what, you should maybe just like set up a quick coffee or a phone call with this person. You probably can't do that because like people are busy, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times they don't want to talk to you because it's so, what you're asking is so obtuse, or you're just like, I don't know. It's very difficult, I think, in general, for people to say no, that they'll string you along, especially if what you're talking about is a little bit vague.
Interesting.
And the ones that I've seen be the most successful are the startups that have a very clear business model. They're able to very clearly demonstrate, like, here's what my product does. I've also taken your company into account. Here's what it looks like when we work together. Here's the things that you measure and the results that you see. I mean, I have seen some really killer B2B sales presentations that, it's like, well, how could they not buy? I mean, I actually was in a meeting.
Sure.
I think it was Porsche is one of the companies in our cohort.
Okay.
A guy in there was like, we have to do this now. If we don't do this now, we'll be behind. It's like, that's exactly what you want people to say.
Totally. Interesting. No, that's great,
It was
though.
amazing.
Yeah, it's cool when you have those moments, right? When you're just like in the room when something like that happens.
Yeah, that was my favorite quote.
No, that's great. That's really cool. So we're coming to kind of the end of the show, but do you maybe want to kind of give a bit of a kind of closing wrap up of if somebody was looking to kind of work with you guys, maybe just give them kind of a quick overview again of what you do to kind of close off the show?
Yeah. Again, we're really focused right now on how do you partner with the tech community to drive your business forward. And certainly the Bridge community is a program that helps people do that. And obviously I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. I think there are other models though that we're exploring. How do you as just one corporation engage with a subset of startups, which is absolutely valid, or how do you there's new models, I think, for engaging that look like, hackathons. I think hackathons, it's a word that sometimes is a little scary, and it's, a lot of people maybe think, God, I don't know what you get out of a hackathon, or how does it even work? We love hackathons because they are really a really cool way, if you have a very specific business challenge, to actually get a bunch of people in the room who are excited about it, who can then go and create businesses around their solution because of the way that I think you have to set it up. We coach corporations on things like you don't own the IP when you have a hackathon. It's kind of rude.
Wow, interesting. Sure. Just before we continue, so if people don't know what a hackathon is, do you want to explain it quick?
Yes, that's a good point. So a hackathon is typically like a 24 or 48-hour challenge where it's always been kind of a developer-focused initiative. Right. People who are building apps or software will go in, and a lot. I think when they were created, it was just developers wanting to learn from other people and build stuff just for fun.
Usually over a weekend, right?
Yeah, usually they start on like a Friday night. There's a lot of pizza. People don't sleep. It's like a lock-in, if you're familiar with that concept. But it's a really fun kind of social thing for them. And I think the idea that you can actually, as a corporation, present a challenge that's really meaty is compelling for people who are, they're interested. We did one with ThyssenKrupp, the elevator company, who has got a partnership with Microsoft, and they brought in a bunch of HoloLenses, and it was like, I'm going to go just because I want to get my hands on one of those, right? And
exactly.
So they had this hackathon. It's a way to raise awareness for your company in the community.
Sure. Their
goal was to recruit tech talent who knew how to program in languages that had to do with HoloLens, because that's what they were
or willing to learn, right?
Yeah, exactly. Meet people who are doing it.
Yeah.
We've also done them on like a very specific business challenge where, again, if the hackathon is set up properly, you can have a team that creates something that could be a great technical solution for you that otherwise you would have hired a big company to help you figure out. I mean, a lot of times you hear companies say, we couldn't figure this out on our own anyway, so we're just going to try it. And it's a lot of fun.
Sure. No, that's very cool. But we're out of time, so let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about the Bridge community and your company, Your Ideas Are Terrible.
Yeah, you bet. So we are online. yourideasareterrible.com is the best place to start. There's links to all the different initiatives that we have there. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.